All right, well, it's 4/20/2021, and Apple had a live event today, and surprisingly, there were some podcasting announcements.
And we're making the biggest change to Apple Podcasts since its debut. This starts with a newly designed Apple Podcasts app.
So there's a new Apple Podcast app. As far as I can tell, this is not out yet. I checked. It's still the old Apple Podcast app for me, but they did show a preview of it.
Every show and episode has a beautiful new page, making it easy to follow, listen, and share. We're also introducing channels to help you find new shows from your favorite creators.
So what are channels? Well, as far as I can tell, it's another way for publishers to group individual shows and episodes under one banner. So if you want to see all of the shows by Pushkin or Luminary, that's interesting. They're a paid podcast app. These publishers will be able to organize all of their content into these channels. I suppose if you are an individual podcaster and you do a lot of shows or you're a network, this will be really helpful.
We're also introducing Apple Podcast subscriptions, which enables you to unlock new content as well as additional benefits like ad-free listening, early access, and much more.
Paid subscriptions. This was definitely the big announcement today, and not a lot of details during the keynote, but they do have this new site, Apple Podcasts for Creators. You can get here, podcasters.apple.com, and they had more details here. So you're going to be able to create a free show, a freemium show, where they can listen to like a regular episode, but then if they're a paid subscriber, they get bonus content, or a exclusively paid podcast on Apple Podcasts. Here's what's interesting. In order to access this program, you have to pay an annual fee. It's basically $20 a year in the US. And basically, you pay this annual fee. It allows you to offer these premium Apple subscriptions, but there's also a revenue share. The first year, Apple's going to get 30% of your subscription price. You get 70%. And then the following years, Apple gets 15% of your revenue. And so you would get 85%. And you still need to pay this annual fee year after year.
So now you can help your favorite podcasters build their business and fuel their creativity.
One question I have after this event is whether folks like the Dithering podcast, who allow folks to add private podcast feeds manually to their podcast app like Apple Podcasts, whether those will still be around, because technically these folks would be able to get around Apple's revenue share. And in Transistor, we've built special onboarding features that allow folks to automatically add private podcast feeds not associated with Apple to podcast players like Apple Podcasts.
You can also create private podcasts for your organization, team, membership site, or for offering premium paid content to regular podcast listeners.
So the question is, will that still be allowed in the new Apple Podcasts app? Will you still be able to add podcast feeds manually? And will you still be able to add these private feeds that aren't under Apple's subscription umbrella?
Apple Podcast subscriptions launches in 170 regions and countries next month.
So all that stuff launches in about a month. The one thing that was supposed to launch today, and those of us in the podcast industry had an idea this was coming, although Apple didn't tell us directly, Podcast Connect hasn't been accepting new podcast submissions. And so we were thinking, okay, well, maybe it's, this is what Apple's working on. They're going to have a new Podcast Connect. And it's supposed to be live today, but once you set it up initially, you get taken to this screen. And I've had this screen now for at least 4 or 5 hours. So there are new features coming, but to get a sense of what they are, you have to go to this site here. So here are some of the new screenshots they've shared. This is a preview of what channels will look like. You can have multiple shows under a channel. And this right here is a preview of what the new Podcast Connect should look like. A few interesting things here. You'll be able to identify what your weekly frequency is. The interface looks nicer. I initially wondered if this hosts and guests sections means that everybody will have access to that beta feature of adding an avatar of the host and guest right in Apple Podcasts. I've since heard from other folks that is only being opened up to certain partners, so that's not for everybody. And you'll be able to see your ratings and reviews from globally. You won't have to go into each individual iTunes store to find your ratings and reviews. So, I mean, this looks nice. It looks clean. It also looks like Apple's podcast analytics is out of beta, and we're getting a new interface here. Looks good. Again, until I actually try it out, it's going to be difficult to know how good this is. And here is an example of what that channel interface could look like. So those are my initial thoughts. I think a lot of people in the podcast industry are looking at this. It will certainly impact Transistor and how we do things, but we still don't have a lot of answers yet. Overall, I'm happy that Apple has done such a big update to the podcast app, to tools for podcasters, and I think having the opportunity to monetize through Apple Podcasts, that could be a good thing, even though the Apple tax of 30% of your revenue seems a little bit steep. Lots to think about. I'd be curious what your thoughts are. Leave those in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going.
Transistor is modern podcast hosting. It's the easy way to upload your audio, submit your show to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and get listener analytics. If you're looking to start a podcast in 2021, or you have existing podcasts that you want to migrate, get a 14-day free trial by going to transistor.fm.